So I'll share screen now, Roger, okay?
Yes, yes, please. That's fine, Simon.
Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. When I was asked to do this presentation to the Global Philotelic Summit, I thought, oh, they're going to take me to Greece for a week to be the keynote speaker. And as a management consultant by sort of trade, and my company was a management consultancy, that I used to write and do presentations for a living, I thought, no problem at all. This will be money for old rope. I have to say it was the hardest presentation that I've ever had to do in my life, because trying to write a presentation about something that is so esoteric, it was like trying to pin jelly to a wall. But I managed to do it, and with a lot of Sarawak examples and examples from other people's collections as well. I like to think that that what I produced will sort of titillate you all as well. So without any further ado, I shall start. The presentation was called The Ascetics of Exhibiting because 90% of the people, probably 95% of the people who were at the Global Philotelic Summit were international exhibitors. But as I said to Roger earlier, what I'm about to say applies to your own collection as well as any exhibits you might do, because it's the way you write up material. So my earliest days, I actually had my first stamp album at 2 years old. As you can see in my left hand, it says stamp album, and that delightful little chap is me. I think that must be a record, that anybody has a photo so young of themselves holding a stamp album. And I've continued to collect ever since. But like all people, when I first started collecting, you know, on the right, you see my first ever stamp album, my boyhood album, and my China page. And on the left, 1967, 10 years old. I was greatly sort of helped by my elder brother, Richard, who you can see he'd sent himself a cover below that. Unfortunately, my elder brother, Richard, got killed in a car accident when he was 18 years old and I was 9. So I only have very vague memories of him, but I do have some of his material. But this is what you do when you get a boyhood stamp album, and a lot of people never progress any further from their boyhood stamp album. But I progressed to collecting one country, as you know, and that country was Sarawak. And before PCs, this is how I started writing up my collection. I used a nice Parker pen and wrote it up by hand. Unfortunately, my handwriting is pretty damn bad. But then in 1990 at Northamptonshire Philotelic Society, I met a man called Eddie Bridges. One of two of you might know Eddie. He unfortunately died of cancer very recently. And but when I first met Eddie, he was an IT specialist and one of the very first people I'd ever seen using a computer to write up his collection. And I was jolly impressed by this. And his collection was absolutely beautiful. You know, using the way he produced it with using the South Africa logos at the top, etc. And so I asked him to tell me how to start writing up a collection using a computer. And I loved his pages, so I started to do it myself. And I work on a Mac. So I bought a brand new Mac computer. And here are some lessons. 1, do not rush into things. 2, choose your font carefully. And 3, think very carefully about your headings. I did neither. I used a very obscure 9-point font called Avant-Garde, and for many years wrote up hundreds of pages using this font. And you can see that font on the right there. Then a life-changing moment for my sanity, my wife's sanity, and my back occurred. 2 months before London 2010, which was my first ever international exhibit, I was asked to display Sarawak at the Collectors Club in New York. But in the audience was two people, one most of you will definitely know, and one some of you might know. The top fellow is Steve Schumann, who was our vice president in the United States, and Bob Odenweiler, who was one of the top international judges at the time, who collected New Zealand. And they took me to one side and said, look, you've definitely got large gold material, but you've got a Vermeer write-up. And they told me I needed to change my font, my headings, and most importantly, my layout. So I had 2 months to completely rewrite my exhibit. So non-designers use a proper typeface for presentation, and good reason. The right font can make or break your presentation. And as I say, typography is a major art form in the design world, and it sets the stage for what you want to say. The biggest mistake that people do make with fonts in presentations is assuming that the first three font styles you see there are boring. It causes them to jump to something like the font on the bottom because it feels more unique and interesting. And our one or two members of our society use that font. What was the name of our dentist chum that died recently? Anybody? Up north? I forget his name. But he used that bottom font.
Ted Bishop.
Ted Bishop, that's the chap. He used that font. Stephen Bob advised me to use a serif font, and everybody seemed to use Times Roman, but I wanted a bit of individuality. So I looked at this font Garamond, and I loved what I read, that Garamond is the Michelangelo's David to the type world, and it's classic and classy. And I thought, well, there's no one more classic and classy as me, so I am going to use Garamond as a font. Most top presenters use a particular style of presentation and storyboarding. And nearly everybody who's at sort of
Oh, Simon, we've lost your voice.
Have you?
I think it's if you move in certain ways, because it happens occasionally. Stop.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I've got earpods in, so that's why. Okay. Most top exhibits have this style, and the top left-hand side says what you must know, then what you should know, and then what's nice to know in various ways that I write up. And my writing up has always been that way ever since I started doing it. So on the left, you see my old headings and using the avant-garde font. And on the right, you see my new headings and my new Garamond font. And you can see it's much clearer and easier to see in the new style than the old style. So you remember that page, my first page before computers, how I used to write up my early Sarawak. That now became this page, which is much easier and cleaner to see. And if you're looking at my album or looking at my exhibit, much easier to read. You don't have to decipher my sort of spider-like scroll. Now, I'm not saying manuscript is all bad, but Brian never encompassed the digital age, God rest his soul, but he used to win many, many prizes at national level by using manuscript. But if you actually have a look, his handwriting was absolutely beautiful. And so certain judges, and Chris Harmon is one of them, that if he sees a beautiful copper plate manuscript exhibit, he actually now gives it more marks for presentation because very few people do it. But there are so few of us that can actually write so beautifully that I don't recommend it. So in 2012, I was invited to do a display to the Royal Philotelic Society. That's 52 frames, 624 pages of Sarawak, and many of you were at that exhibit. And I believe that to be the pinnacle of philatelic exhibiting. It took 18 months of effort. My collection had never, ever looked so good. And it was then completely and utterly spoilt by international exhibiting. The reason it was spoilt by international exhibiting is this wonderful collection you've written for yourself. You then have to take bits and pieces out to do an international exhibit. And you completely destroy the structure of your own personal collection.
Look, well, thanks very much for everything
That's
this
it.
morning and
And,
tying up the thingies.
I'll see you Sunday, yeah?
Yes.
That's it. Okay.
Right. Good.
Enjoy that. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks very much.
Bye for now.
Lovely morning.
Oh, right.
So the definition, aesthetics. Aesthetics, you can see there, a set of principles concerned with the nature and appreciation of beauty. And aesthetic comes to us from German philosophers who used it for the theory of the beautiful. For centuries, philosophers and artists have attempted to decipher the composite parts of what makes something aesthetically pleasing. And to this day, we have no definitive answer. But there are still some ideas that have stood the test of time. And one of these concepts is the golden section or golden ratio. So once I put that definition up, you can understand why I found it so exceptionally difficult to write a presentation on what are the aesthetics of exhibiting. This particular picture, very, very well-known picture, is perceived to be very aesthetically pleasing. The Great Wave off of Kanagawa. And this is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now, I, who's not a great lover of art, can actually see why that picture is beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. But this is also perceived to be aesthetically pleasing. Jackson Pollock in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Is it aesthetically pleasing? I would put it to you, it's not. But to some, it is. And the appreciation of aesthetics is a very individual perception. I mean, Mondrian's composition is, to some people, beautiful. But two people can look at exactly the same object as the cartoon shows on the right and have completely different opinions of what they're looking at. So you have to think of the viewer of your collection and the workings of their. So if you're a judge, and we've all been to shows where there are hundreds and thousands of pieces of displays. And the brain can play massive tricks when faced with lots and lots of material. I mean, take for instance this. How many legs are there on that?
Yes.
That is amazing.
How many legs on that elephant? Is that a boy or is that a girl's leg? Move your eyes across the image. That image is moving. I can assure you it's not. I can assure you that is a static image, but your brain is telling you it's moving.
That's
And
amazing.
it's not moving at all. Again, that image is not moving, but your brain is telling you that image is moving. Can you all see it? It's moving, but it's not moving. So I reiterate, imagine having to look at hundreds, if not thousands of pages of displays and what your brain actually tells you. And we've all seen images and exhibits where a lot of thematic exhibits are especially like this, where the page looks as if something has been spilt across the page. So I am a great advocate of the use of white space. In sculpture, the empty space, what I call the negative space, is as important as the solid piece itself. And in this particular piece of sculpture, which sits in my drawing room, the way that the white spaces have been done add to the beauty of the sculpture itself. The negative space is as important as the solid piece itself. So we've all seen this image. The white space or the negative space is a spacing between different elements which contain nothing. And we call that space that's filled positive. and the negative space helps to mold and define what the positive space is. So this can be demonstrated by looking at that optical illusion below. So what do you see? Do you see the vase or the two faces? If you see the faces, that's because in this particular design, the white space is acting as a negative space where the black is positive. But if you inverse the roles and get a completely different view, because both of them are working together to mold the image. And what I'm trying to illustrate is that your negative space is equally important as it helps define the content that resides in the positive space. So when you're writing your collection up, don't think of the white space as a leftover bit that you didn't use, but rather as a major structural player in your page layout. So it's probably the use of white space, the most contentious of all judging criteria, too much or too little white space. And it's subjective for both the exhibitor and the judge. I have had the same exhibit criticized for having too much white space and also having too little white space. And some of you have seen this cover of mine, which is the earliest known cover of Sarawak. It's into Captain Bethune in 1845. Go back to it. Just remember that cover, because I will come back to it. There's a lot of white space on that page at the moment. My three really important 1888 De La Rue hand-painted essays. Because of the uniqueness and importance, each one could deserve a page on its own. However, in my opinion, there could be too much white space. So better to put all three on one page, and the space then highlights each block. Again, the white space highlights the material and the fact that each of the pieces I show there have major errors. This is a thematic display with no white space. And imagine the effect on the brain if you're looking at 128 pages that have no white space on them at all. Sometimes there's an intense fear by people who have collections with breaking up the content in some way. And the excuses below have been heard by all judges doing critique. But what those excuses? Well, I have all that stuff on the page because it's related to the same topic. As you'd say, that's rationalization defense mechanism. I like having everything in one spot. Well, that's separation anxiety. It's equally important information. That's phobia of favoritism. And viewers will keep looking because they'll want to read everything I've written. Well, that's total narcissism. What I wanted to know is how did De La Rue know that collectors in the future would be using A4 pages? It's wonderful because, you know, this is my 1923 provisional first printing with a SNET error. This is the second printing, but the unique block with no SNET error. A lot of white space on that page, but anything else on that page would totally detract from the uniqueness of that one particular block, the only one from the second printing without the SNET error. And here's my page of the provisional second printing, only 13 sheets printed, again showing the SNET error. And I come back to, you know, and Malcolm, you'll appreciate this, that those De La Rue pages fit perfectly onto an A3 page, and I'm sure the designer in 1923 must have had a look into the future to see what we'd all be writing on and exhibiting on. A few blocks discovered in the De La Rue archives with multiple airplane watermark, all on different coloured trials and all unique. And that watermark was used by the Stamps of Luxembourg and only one issue of Luxembourg. So this simple illustration shows the watermark and shows that you can actually use an illustration to highlight what's on the page, and it adds to the page. Otherwise, you're showing the front of a page and no one would understand what was on the back. This is the only piece known with a single airplane watermark. Again, the watermark used by Luxembourg. A lot of white space again, but anything else would detract from the uniqueness of the page. And again, that simple little illustration shows the watermark. Now, prove that white space is appreciated by some, because that picture sold for 20 million US dollars. Robert Ryman's Untitled. Well, I put it to you, I could do that, but I probably wouldn't get $20 million for it. But some people like white space. Balance. Balance is really important. Taken from the APS manual, that presentation only gets 5 points. And presentation is the least important criterion used in evaluating an exhibit. I fundamentally and utterly disagree with that statement opposite. A good presentation makes you want to look at the presentation longer. Bad presentation immediately puts the viewer, the judge, off, and they want to walk off. I mean, I've looked at so many people's collections, and if I see it looks beautiful, I want to look more. If it looks really scruffy and bad, you don't really want to look at it at all. Probably one of the sort of most amazing presentations ever done to the Royal was 624 pages of pre-stamped covers. Material amazing, but after the first frame, I was bored out of my skin because pre-stamped covers all look the same, in my opinion. I've got what's happened there? Okay. This is taken from an FIP presentation to judges before Singapore 2015. And they use this as an example of not a well-balanced frame. Too many one-cover pages, and in their opinion, not enough material for one-frame exhibit. They say this is an example of a better balanced frame. I don't necessarily agree, because I do think it's very, very subjective. Better frame balance, each one-cover page contains a significant item. Hardly any extra material, so what's the difference? Reverse of covers and cancellations are enlarged. I've seen many exhibits with 2 covers on every page, with repetition and a high degree of symmetry. That in itself can lead to a numbing of too positive.
Sorry.
Noticing the difference in the used collection. At the top cover, the Post Office Sarawak is used as a dispatch mark. The bottom cover is the first example where the Post Office Sarawak cancellation was first ever used on the cancel the adhesives. The new 9 parallel bars cancellation, so the Post Office Sarawak gets used on the front of the cover again. The bottom cover, I make no excuses for, in my view, is the most beautiful of all the East India covers known, and there are only 20 odd covers known. I have 9 of them, but that is by far, in my opinion, the most beautiful. Beautiful 3 color franking. But again, 2 covers to a page works well. Here, 1 cover to the page, because that is the earliest known Sarawak adhesive, and that was the front page of the Charles Symes auction in 1971. But to show the date, to show that it is the earliest date, you have to show the back, because the double oval cancel on the back that shows the date it is actually on the back. So you must show the back to show that it is the earliest cover known. Again, this paid cancellation, one of only 2 covers known with this cancellation. The other cover is the large 12-cent cover, which is also in my collection. But again, the scan of the back is absolutely necessary to show the date of the cover. And this is the only cover known bearing the box registration cancel. The scan of the back here is not so necessary, but as I display all 3 covers side by side, it has much better balance, showing all 3 covers, showing the front and back of all 3 covers. If I'd have not shown the back on that one, it would have been completely out of balance. This is the first issue of Sarawak, as we know, showing the various cancellations. Now, I could have shown a lot more 9-bar cancels. I could have shown a lot more S in diamond cancels. but the aim was to achieve balance. And I like that page because it does show a high degree of balance and makes the viewer want to read more about it. In this case, I used an A3 double page to show the 3 different printing stones used for the second stamp of Sarawak. So you've got stone 1, stone 2, and stone 3. Much more impact showing all 3 stones and the difference in the sizes of the gutter block by putting them all on an A3 than it would do on 3 separate pages. And here I'm showing a substituted transfer, and the strip, the horizontal strip, is balanced by the block, which also shows the substituted transfer. Horizontal strips are always very difficult to show in your own collection or to exhibit. And this simple illustration that I've put there, a very simple illustration, but it shows the concept of substitution on a substituted transfer much better than 20 or 30 lines of text. It immediately shows what I'm talking about. Again, here's my page of 12-cent proofs. I have many others, but by leaving the middle of that top blank, it highlights a scarce blue proof. If I'd have put another proof there, it wouldn't have sort of stood out quite so much. The bottom is how do I show the proofs that are printed both sides? And if you see how I've done it is actually folded one over and to actually show what is printed on the other side. And that strip actually illustrates it perfectly. You saw this cover and this page in Malcolm's presentation on Sunday. One of only 2 covers known bearing this provisional, and also the only used block showing the double overprint. Now that cover, although it's the most amazing cover, is quite small. So there was room to show the block, which added much more balance to the page. And then the box, the reverse, shows the box registration council. And I like to think that page now has great balance. Here's an example of the colour trials of the 1 cent in the middle of the page, top and tailed by the issued stamp, including the copy from the De La Rue specimen book. Again, I think this page gives great balance.
Oh, you've dropped out again, Simon.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it can now. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I think if you
Okay.
lean back, you disappear.
Okay. Vertical strips are always difficult, but in this case, I started to buy 1 or 2 of them, and I had enough to show a page where the vertical strips didn't look silly on their own. Again, I think that's good balance. So imagine my excitement at finding that bottom cover, to find the 2 high values on cover. I was very excited, but how do I exhibit it? And what you can see how I've done it. I've shown 50 cents, both mint and used, the dollar, both mint and used, a great block of the 50 cents, and then the cover at the bottom. And again, I think that shows balance and actually illustrates shows, in my opinion, mint, used, block, cover, all on 1 page. Great balance. So initially, I just had the die proof and the stamps on the page together for the 16 and 32 cents. But then I managed to pick up the 16 cents and 32 cents on a cover. I mean, just pure serendipity, but it shows great philatelic and aesthetic balance, that you've got the proof of the 2 values, then show the 2 values, and then the cover showing the 2 values. And I like to think that that shows great balance. And here on the 1895 issue, I've got the original artist's essay for the unissued 1 cent. And I balanced that up on the page by showing the die proof, showing how the 1 cent design was actually used for the 4 cent stamp. Here I show an appendix sheet for the 30 cents value. Now I could have put this appendix sheet in the middle of the page, but I think it has much more impact by putting the actual issued stamp against the color selected for that stamp. And I tried a block of 4, and I tried a single stamp, but I actually think the balance of the pair alongside it works much better. Now, this is from, I mentioned Eddie Bridges earlier. His partner was Carol Bomarito. Now, Carol Bomarito was married to a man called Harvey Mirsky, who probably had one of the greatest collections of 1847 USA. And when Harvey died, Carol sold his collection, but she missed all his philatelic friends. So at the age of 60-something, Carol decided to start collecting on her own. And what a collection she put together. Carol now has a large gold for her transatlantic collection. And I just love the way that she displays. She uses double pages, and she's first time ever has displayed logically rather than chronologically. Now, obviously, with the name of Carol, she's a female. So she thinks differently when she exhibits. Now, the judges hated this to start with. And she, although she had great material, she was marked down because she didn't follow the traditional chronological way of exhibiting. But she said, no, it doesn't make sense to me. I want to do it logically. So here you'll see covers from Great Britain to and from the United States. Here, which is her title page, she uses good balance. I personally don't like coloured borders. But so logically to her, she then shows covers transatlantic from Belgium to the United States. So she's using a geographic simplicity. And I admired it the first time I saw it. And it took judges one or two exhibitions to realize that, yes, it does work. It's much better to show it from country to country than it does chronologically. At the time, I had a lot of Germans in the audience, so they loved this page. This is from the German states, transatlantic mail to the United States. Again, beautiful pages. You want to delve in to read more. And what fantastic balance. I mean, these two covers, each of those covers are just cracking covers, but I actually think they work much better on a page together. I mean, that is just, I mean, Luxembourg to the United States, just superb covers, large frankings. So what do you do?
You've gone again,
the
Simon.
odd shapes are not very aesthetic.
Simon, you've gone.
Have you got me?
Ah,
Hello?
you back again? Yes.
Can you hear me? Sorry. How do you deal with odd shapes? You know, they lack balance, and they're not sometimes very aesthetically pleasing. I think the only way to do is to emphasize and embrace the oddity, as you can see with my 2 pages here. Again, this is the only gutter block known of the 12 cents, 1875 12 cents, and there's 1 stamp missing. Do I try and hide the fact there was 1 stamp missing? No, I emphasize the oddity. I also, on this, is a substituted transfer. And again, I've used a little example showing what a substituted transfer is, because that immediately shows the viewer what they're looking at. Now, this illustrates the 2 different printings of the 12 cents. And as Malcolm described on Sunday, the difference is in the perforations of the left margin. And this block caused me huge problems. Ascetics versus Philotelic Principles. Now, someone could argue that aesthetically, it would be better to take the 4 stamps off and just have a block. But that would just go against all my philatelic principles of taking 4 stamps away from a large block. So I decided that my philatelic principles were greater than my aesthetic principles, and I left those 4 stamps on the top. And I actually think it works. Importance of color. A page with a selection of color adds emphasis and is attractive. That's why I 2 pages of De La Rue marginal blocks, because of Jubilee lines. That 4-cent block on the right has caused me great problems aesthetically, and I've been trying to change it now for a few years. I want to find a 4-cent block, just a block of 4, with the margin on the left, but I haven't been able to find one. See, with a 4-cent block with a margin on the left, with just a block of 4, that page would look much better, in my opinion. And it's little things like that that actually do, in my opinion, make a difference. Now, coloured die proofs of the 1895 stamps, they not only emphasise colour, but by putting them like that, the white space and balance shows to the viewer that they're different shapes, but if I put 1 on each page, they'd look silly. If I put 4 or 5 on a page, they'd look too squashed. So I thought 3 was the perfect thing to do. In an international exhibit, it's very, very unusual to show a complete set of stamps on one page. So the use of colours on a page is quite rare. And that's why I love this page of colour trials, because they can all be shown on one page and there's masses and masses of colour. And colour is important. Here's the Delarue colour trials for the 1921 new values. These were discovered in the 1996 in the Delarue archives. And again, you've got 3 different colour trials, and the emphasis on colour, I think, is very important. Now, this is from the ex-president of the Royal Philotelic Society's collection, Patrick Marcellis, the essays of the medallion issue. Besides the content, the page is very aesthetically pleasing due to the various colours on the page and the way he deals with those various proofs and essays. Now, images in art, are they an enhancement or distortion? Dieter Mikkelsen is the managing director of Corinphilia, and his display to the Royal Philatelic Society was, in my opinion, aesthetically superb. And since then, he's used the same way of displaying material in his catalogues, in Corinphilia catalogues. Now, I loved his presentation to the Royal using these images. If he tried to exhibit this internationally, he would get slated for the images and only one cover on a large page. I thought it was probably the most beautiful exhibit I've actually ever seen at the Royal. Here's another couple of his pages. They're absolutely beautiful. Now, sometimes you have to do what you want to do, and it's your collection. And in his view, that's how he wants to do his collection. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. Another couple of pages. But judges hate it. Judges absolutely hate it, but I love it. And I would like to think that most of you looking at this presentation this morning also think those pages look absolutely beautiful. I mean, the right-hand page, that cover on its own, although it's an exceptionally important cover, is quite a boring cover. It's just beige with a 4 on it. But with the picture, it comes to life. Now, you've seen this page before. There was no empirical evidence presented to substantiate my statement at the bottom of the page. This is the earliest known example of Sarawak mail. And I also thought there's too much white space for that little cover. So I added empirical evidence by illustrating a page from the dated journal showing that Captain Bethune was in Sarawak at the time. And this is from Keppel's book. And he says on that page that on February that I picked up Bethune to take him to Sarawak. I knew he was in Sarawak in July 1845 because I knew that he'd painted a picture. And I went to the Yale University, where I knew the pictures were stored, and managed to get the image of that picture. So now that assertion that it's the earliest known cover is now proven. And I actually think the page is much more aesthetically pleasing by the use of the image. But now some would say it's a little bit busy. Is this better, or is this too formal? Now, that one shows all the empirical evidence. That one not so much. I actually prefer that, and that's what's in my collection now. This man, Jean Varus, he's got a Grand Prix exhibit on stamps of Switzerland, and every one of those covers is a world-class cover. On the left is his exhibit, international exhibit. On the right, when he did his presentation to the Royal Philotelic Society, he took a cover, added a picture, and even put coins of that particular period. Which, if either, is the better example? Again, the images and coins enhances the experience for the viewer, but judges would hate it. When I spoke to Jean Varus, he likes the right-hand page, but knows if he wanted to get a Grand Prix at international level, he could never do the right-hand page. He'd have to do it the left-hand page because judges don't want to see coins in a stamp exhibit. However, this is my Office of Registry cancellation for my exhibit, and that scrappy old banknote is the oldest known banknote from Sarawak. It also shows the correct use of that Office of Registry cancellation. Its use on that page has been adversely remarked upon by judges. But to me, it tells the story that the Office of Registry cancellation should have been used to cancel banknotes and not to cancel stamps. And by putting both on the same page, I actually think it illustrates much better. Interesting, the bottom cover is one of only 3 known and is a very expensive cover, but that scrappy banknote above it is actually worth a lot more money. Not to me, but it is to some people who collect banknotes. Again, from Patrick Marcellus's collection. This demonstrates a problem caused by perforating and thus producing unequal stamps. So on this page, he uses a diagram, which is very useful and adds tremendously to the page. Jean Varus, again from the earlier Swiss presentation, his whole presentation is about rates, and some of the rates from Switzerland at the time, if you just went an extra 5 kilometers, it was an extra rate, another 10 kilometers was another rate. Very, very difficult to explain in writing, but those diagrams show perfectly the different rate changes in Switzerland. I actually think his exhibit is one of the finest exhibits. It is aesthetically pleasing. The viewer, even the non-philatelic viewer, can immediately see what he's trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Before digital microscopes, collectors used hand illustrations to describe flaws, and these are artistic pieces in my own right. I sold these a couple of years ago, and one of our present audience bought them, and I hope he's very happy with them. Unfortunately, I didn't have room for them in my international exhibit, but they are beautiful pieces, and so exactly what people used to do to highlight various flaws before we had digital microscopes. Talking of digital microscopes, which is better, hand drawings or my use of the digital microscope to show, tiny horizontal guides? I wish I could do it. I actually think that the hand-drawn ones are beautiful. You've all seen this page of mine before, I presume. Letter from Admiral Pascoe to his son. And Admiral Pascoe, when he was a lieutenant, hoisted the signal flags on HMS Victory during the Battle of Trafalgar. Does the addition of the image enhance the page? Now, if you were exhibiting internationally, probably not. For my own collection, yes, absolutely. In my view, it enhances the page completely. So here I've got 2 unique die proofs showing original die and the new die. And I've used both photography and digital imagery to illustrate the difference. By putting both those proofs on one page, it doesn't really illustrate what I'm trying to show, but by using an enhanced photograph and digital you can immediately see the difference between the two die proofs. In the left-hand one, the cents are all the same height, the CENTS. In the right-hand one, the C is much taller, or the 4 is much taller, and the C is taller. And you can only really illustrate that by using digital imagery or using illustrations to do so. This little die proof is stamp size. So I used the photograph which that die proof was taken to actually show page balance. So that's a photograph that the die proof was taken from, but it shows much more balance on a page. Again, some of you have seen this. This in 1895 is a letter from the Treasurer of Sarawak to the Managing Director of Perkins Bacon. It's the earliest cover known bearing that issue, but that letter, that cover contained a letter from the Perkins Bacon archive showing that this was the letter where he paid for that particular issue of stamps. So by putting the letter, be it a copy of the letter, that cover contained, I think it enhances the cover because it tells the whole story of that particular cover. But ugly can be beautiful too. And this is very apposite. The bottom stamp is very, very ugly, and it would normally be discarded. It's worth nothing. But every judge that's ever seen my exhibit has remarked how much they love this page. Whilst worthless, that stamp absolutely visually emphasizes how difficult it is to collect good material from what I call tropical countries. So the top block is a perfect color. I show various degrees of tropicalization, and then the bottom one is how extreme case of tropicalization. And those, just by putting that on one page, it absolutely shows to anybody looking that those of us that collect the stamps of Sarawak, to get stamps with great color is exceptionally difficult. This is one of my favorite pieces in my whole collection, a complete parcel showing unrecorded and previously unknown parcel labels. Only discovered 5 or 6 years ago, and in every way brilliant, both philatelically, aesthetically, because luckily it fits on an A4 page, and has balance. And yes, some people would say it's ugly, but to me, it's beautiful too. Documents can be very beautiful. Again, from Patrick Marcellus's collection, it's the earliest letter from showing the arms of the city of Antwerp. But he's managed to show it in a beautiful way. If you just put the document on the page without the writing, it would just look daft. No one would know what it was, and people just walk past it. Now, as I said, ugly is beautiful. This is very apposite because, as you know, this sold for 8.3 million yesterday. And some would say this is a dog of a stamp. The 1 cent black on magenta is an ugly stamp. I think it's a dog of a stamp. So what's the conclusion? No matter how good your material is, it can still be enhanced by aesthetically pleasing presentation, as demonstrated here. And this is from the Monaco Royal Collection. Every page is gold for the frames in gold with the Monacos on the top of the page, but the opposite can be true. Now, if you're not going to exhibit competitively, then presenting your collection or not is purely your choice. What you collect, how you mount or display is purely self-gratification and for your own self-pleasure. But you can still think at all times about the overall aesthetics of your collection. If you're going to exhibit competitively, then remember this. Rules are there for the obedience of fools and the guidance of wise men. Think, how can I present this that gives the viewer the best experience? Be brave on presentation. Make best use of the material you have. Use white space, color, balance, and images. But most of all, you must think about the overall aesthetics. Ascetic is the opposite of anesthetic.
Very good.
Bravo.
Well done, Simon.
Thank you.
Simon, thank you for
Brilliant.
that.
That was brilliant.
Excellent.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well done.
Excellent.
I'm
thank
sure
you.
there are questions.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions, Simon.
Yeah.
How do you treat rarity, and how do you deal with certificates in a competitive exhibition?
Okay. First one, rarity. I absolutely dislike the American system of which they say, if it's rare, I put it red. If it's very, very rare, I do it in silver. If it's exceptionally rare or unique, I put it in gold. Because by the time I've got to the third page, I've forgotten what's rare or not. I was once told by a judge that, yes, you don't show us something's rare or unique. You now see that I do something which goes against, it's normally anathema to an Englishman because we don't like being overstated, but I actually now put in red at the bottom of a thing, this is the only item known. Okay.
Right.
When I first did it, a couple of judges said, we don't like to see that. And I said, well, other judges say they want to know what's rare. So I make no bones about it. This is the only item known. This is one or two items known. And I use red writing on my page to show that. Okay. So that deals with that. There's two things, certification and provenance. I don't like to see people's exhibits saying provenance, Miri, signs, because if you have a great collection, most of your stuff has provenance and you don't need to show what was in the past because it now belongs to you. However, if it's got a certificate, and quite often judges ask to see certificates, I always put in the write-up, in 9 point, I put cert. I think there's an example. There was one of the examples in the Officer Registry page. I just put in italics, in 9 point, cert, C-E-R-T, that item has a certificate.
Right, and normally you just put that on the back of the
You have to put the certificate on the back of the page,
yeah.
But I mention it in the write-up that if it's got a cert, I put it, especially with some of the very, very rare material.
And that's all. But
I no longer put provenance on because.
Right, thank you for that.
Okay.
An observation, Simon, on the BBC website yesterday when they were reporting the record price for the 1 cent black and magenta, they said it was an ugly stamp. It was even uglier the way they actually presented it because the image was the back of the stamp rather than the front.
Well, you heard it here first. The announcement that Stanley Gibbons bought it is the biggest scam in philatelic history. Okay?
It is.
Stanley Gibbons haven't got the cash balances to buy that stamp.
No.
Okay? Phoenix, which is the private equity company that funds Stanley Gibbons, who would advise them to spend £8.5 million on a stamp? What I think has happened is Sotheby's haven't sold it. Okay? And they've done a deal with Gibbons that Gibbons can say they bought it, and Gibbons will try, and they're trying to do this. You can all own a bit of the stamp, a bit of crowdfunding on the stamp, and then eventually, if they get enough money, pay Sotheby's. But Sotheby's didn't want to be left with egg on their face. Gibbons could not afford that stamp. They do not have the cash balances to do it.
Yeah. And they'd have to have somebody lined up to buy it, wouldn't they?
They don't. Anybody would have bought it at the sale.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
I mean, when Stuart Weitzman, and I know Stuart, who bought it before, because he's a member of the Club de Monte Carlo, he's not a stamp collector, but when you own the world's most valuable stamp, he was invited to be a member of the Club de Monte Carlo just to show the stamp there. I mean, Stuart was the only bidder at the time when he bought it.
And that was what, three and something million, wasn't it?
9.5 million US.
Oh, crikey.
So he's lost money on it.
So he's lost money on it. Yeah.
Can you explain to me what the thrill is of owning 100,000th part of a stamp?
No.
No.
It's a bit
And-
like it's a bit
And
like
how do
owning
you
a-
how do you display that, Simon?
I don't know how. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a bit like owning a hoof of a racehorse, isn't it?
Yeah, crackers.
Yeah.
A lot of white space.
Yeah, a lot of white space. Yeah.
Well, at least you can watch your bit of the racehorse racing.
Yes, that's right.
Much of a stamp.
I mean, it's a dog of a stamp. It's ghastly.
Oh, yes.
Simon, one other thing. A number of the covers there, you included some reference to who the addressee was.
Yeah.
But not in all cases.
No. I normally show who the addressee is if I know who it is. Occasionally, just occasionally, as you know, I suddenly find that more about Mr. Campbell of Jersey, and I rewrite the cover. If I know who it is, I do research to try and find out who it is,
Yeah.
and I always mention it. If it's not mentioned, it's because I haven't found out.
Does it depend on the notoriety of the person or whatever? There's the boxed registration cover addressed to Deval in Sumatra.
Yeah.
And he was involved in the first railway there and things like that. I mean, is it worth poking around and finding that information out or not?
Yeah, if you've got the time. I have to say that writing up my incoming covers for our meeting at the end of June, when I started writing them up, I was taking sort of half a day per cover because I was doing an awful lot of research on postal rates, etc. And then suddenly realized I didn't have 20 covers, I had about 150 covers to write up. And as the day got closer, the amount of research I did on each cover got less. So I'm hoping that each time I go to the SPH, experts in the SPH will put me right on rates and registration fees, etc. And I'll rewrite each cover gradually over a period of time. And as Mike knows, you know, there are some very, very knowledgeable postal historians in the SPH.
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing having me and you in, actually.
I know. Yeah. Anybody else?
Just I'd like to make an observation that fashions change and even judges' opinions change. The first time I showed a aerophilatelic exhibit, competitive exhibit, I was damned for actually showing picture postcards of the contemporary picture postcards of the planes that actually carried the mail. Now I get the feeling that judges actually expect ephemera to be in an aerophilatelic exhibition, as long as it's relevant. So times, judges' opinions can change.
There's been a change that more and more people actually are more fascinated by the ephemera and the story behind a cover than the cover itself. I mean, that's why we now have an open class in international philately for people who have got an exhibit that doesn't fit in one particular class, like postal history or traditional. I personally love showing bits of ephemera. My airmail display, as you know, which is going to be at London 2022, has telegrams, it has mail lists, it has pictures. Without those, I'd never get 80 pages of RAF flights, would I? You can't possibly do it. I've managed to get 80 pages by not padding as such, because each of those items are philatelic in their own right, but you couldn't do it just with covers. It'd be boring. You need to tell a story. And my point, John, is it's your collection.
Yeah.
Do it how you see fit.
Oh,
and a good example is Claire on the here today. Is Claire here?
No.
Eh?
Don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
Claire has got world-class material. World-class material. And she should be getting large golds every time she shows. And she's lucky to get what she gets, because judges hate the way she writes it up. But Claire's view is bugger the lot of them. I'm writing it up this way and that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
And she's chosen to show it the way she wants to show it. And good on her. But she will, if you want to get a large gold, you have to, or gold or large gold, you have to conform to a certain degree.
Uh-huh.
There you go. I'm glad you enjoyed it because it was a bit of fun.
It's good. Great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. That's excellent. We are very
Yes.
impressed.
I've got a shade of green, but never mind.
Simon,
I've got a shade of green, but never mind.
Simon, one point, and I'm not trying to be a clever dick. On your Pasco cover,
Yeah.
okay, England expects that every man will do his duty.
Yes, I know that. It needs rewriting. You're not the first time you've told me either.
No, it clearly didn't sink in.
Do your duty and so.
Yeah.
I think if there are no more questions, maybe we thank Simon for a fantastic display and a very thought-provoking one. And we look forward to at least some of us meeting at the end of this month in Tiverton, and hopefully an auction, all being well. And I look forward to seeing you there, and enjoy your collecting. Thank you.
Yes,
Thanks,
thanks.
Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. On behalf of
Bye.
yes, thank
Bye.
you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'll do it for
Cheers.
Cockermouth if you want.
That's good.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Okay.
Cheers.